staffed by the Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture, is an independent board composed of 9, currently 8 appointed art and design professionals that hold public meetings to review and vote on matters concerning the city's art collection. Meetings are generally held the second Tuesday of each month to review current public art projects cited on or proposed for City of Boston property. In accordance with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Executive Order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, we are conducting this meeting virtually. To ensure public access to the deliberations of the Boston Art Commission, the public may access this meeting through telephone and video conferencing. And we will get started in just a moment. Okay. Next slide. Oops. We still have people coming in to join us. I'd like to welcome everyone to the first of 2 special meetings of the Boston Art Commission on the Emancipation Group. A copy of a statue in Washington, D.C. by Thomas Ball. Thank you to everyone who is here tonight. We appreciate all the time and attention you have shared so far. Community conversations about public artworks, their history, and their meaning will inform the Boston Art Commission's review of existing artworks as well as future public art projects. In particular, we encourage you to share your recommendations on the future of the Emancipation Group by offering verbal testimony today or on the 30th, which we'll instruct you on shortly. We'll be allowing 2 minutes per person for verbal testimony today. More extensive written testimony may be sent to the Commission at bac@boston.gov and will be made part of the record and available to all commissioners. You may also take an online survey intended to invite public input on the range of possibilities and considerations of the Emancipation Group. The survey closes on Monday at 12 noon, and we can share that with you in the chat, and we'll also be going over the details of that further in the presentation. You can find that on boston.gov/art-on-review. The first meeting was originally scheduled for June 30th, but with the abundance of public interest we have received by email and petition and a desire to be responsive, we felt it was necessary to hold the first meeting earlier. We have a follow-up meeting scheduled for June 30th at 5 p.m. Next slide. I am joined by my colleagues from the Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture in facilitating the meeting. Trisha Gilrang, Collections Manager, and Christina Carroll, Director of Communications, will both be managing the slides and monitoring the chat as well as raised hands. And we will go over what all that means if you are unfamiliar with Zoom. I will now hand it over to Chair Mark Pasnick and Vice Chair Aqua Holmes. They will be calling the meeting to order and going over some further instructions.
Thank you, Karen. Welcome, everyone. I'm calling this special meeting, this special hearing to order at 6:08 p.m. Today, the Commission will be holding a special meeting of the Boston Art Commission. This is not our usual meeting, but a special one dedicated to this moment. I will be joined by Aqua Holmes, who is the Vice Chair. She and I together will be facilitating the testimonial phase of the work. Next slide, please. I will now take the roll call of commissioners to confirm a quorum. After I state your name, Commissioner, please say here. Aqua Holmes.
Here.
Camilo Alvarez.
Here.
Michael Canizzo.
Here.
Next slide. Cara.
Here.
George.
Here.
Bob.
Here.
Lisa.
Here.
Thank you. So we have a full quorum. We will be following the publicly posted agenda. So if I could have the next 2 slides, actually. The agenda, as you can see, is the one publicly posted. We'll begin with the director's report, and then we will have time for public testimony on the Emancipation Group, a copy of a sculpture in Washington, D.C. by Thomas Ball. Next, please.
Yeah, definitely. It was being on the phone.
We will now have Karen give her director's report. Next slide. Karen.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. So if we go to the next slide. So the purpose of my report today will be to discuss the Boston Art Commission's intent to follow a public process in regards to the Emancipation Group, and to provide some background on the sculpture itself, the public process to this date, and ways to engage in this public process moving forward. Next slide, please. Here you can see an image of the Emancipation Group. The Emancipation Group was installed in Park Square in 1879. The sculpture is by Thomas Ball, but it is a copy of an original artwork that is currently in Washington, D.C. The inscription on the statue reads, "A race set free and the country at peace, Lincoln, rest from his labors." And it also reads, "Given to the city of Boston by Moses Kimball, 1879. The Emancipation Group, as I'm sure everyone here knows, has been criticized since its installation, primarily for its visual representation of Archer Alexander as the passive recipient of Lincoln's gift of freedom. Many also feel that it inaccurately implies that one person is solely responsible for ending slavery, presenting Lincoln as a paternalistic white savior and obscuring his complex history. The BAC has received repeated calls for its removal over the years, and recently including a petition that has garnered thousands, I think 12,000, maybe we'll go over that, of signatures. Next slide. We have a website, a webpage on the City of Boston's general website. So you would go to boston.gov/art under review, or you could go to public art under review. And I just learned today that you do not have to type those hyphens in. So if you are interested in learning a little bit more, we'll be referencing this website a few times during this meeting. But on the website, we have information about this public meeting, the meeting we have scheduled for the 30th, information about a survey that we've put together to gather public opinion, and also a blog post by the Art Commission. And I'll read you some excerpts from that blog post that we posted, but we recommend that you go online and read that and also share your thoughts with us in written form. The post from the Art Commission excerpt is this: "Memorials long known to be symbols that promote white supremacy are being challenged and removed around the world in response to the demands of protesters calling for anti-racism and decolonization. The City of Boston and the Boston Art Commission, which is responsible for the commissioning, acquisition, and maintenance of the art collection owned by the City of Boston, recognize the significant yet overlooked role public art plays in the city and the need for the collection to reflect our residents and the values of our communities. Unfortunately, and despite ongoing efforts, African Americans, women, Indigenous peoples, local activists, LGBTQ figures, and many others are missing from the commemorative landscape in our public spaces and have been missing for centuries. Addressing the failures and voids in the city's commemorative landscape is in line with the goals and visions articulated in the BAC's curatorial mission, in particular in the aims of engaging communities, enriching and enlivening the urban environment, and enhancing diversity, examining and interpreting the city's public art collection, and addressing inequities that are embedded in some of our monuments and memorials are also directly in line with the city's cultural plan Boston Creates and the city's Resilient Boston Plan for Racial Equity. As we work to address racism as a public health crisis in the city, it's important to evaluate the role and impact of our collection. And a truly comprehensive approach to the considerations of problematic artworks will address their complex histories and origins and allow for members of the public to contribute their own observations and suggestions of monuments that need recontextualization, additional educational components, or require removal." Next slide. And here you can see some of the steps that we've taken in recent years. In 2017, the Art Commission established a collection policy to ensure that only artworks of the highest quality and enduring value are accepted into the city's holdings. And with the creation of that policy, we have sort of started really being careful about what our processes are in these steps, and we're happy to also share this document with you, and it will be acting as a guide for us as we enter into these next steps. In 2018, the Art Commission commissioned an Opportunity for Change, which is a report on the national dialogue surrounding monuments and its relevance to Boston's public art collection in particular. The report included an overview of how other cities have tackled this issue, and we will hit on the highlights of that today, and this is also something we can share with you and is posted on the website. And lastly, in 2019, the Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture began an effort to catalog the city's art collection, create a searchable online database with educational content, and we see all these efforts really tied together in the work we're doing here today. Next slide. As I mentioned, that's the website where you can find all this content. Important to note there is that the online survey is there, and we are asking in particular about your thoughts around the Emancipation Group, and we list out a number of different options, and we ask respondents to tell us which options they recommend, as well as to rank those options in order that they believe they benefit the city. The options include providing additional educational information at the current site to inform the public about the Emancipation Proclamation, ongoing calls for justice, the failures of Reconstruction, and the deficiencies of the work. Commissioning a new work of art, permanent or temporary, which would be in dialogue with the existing Emancipation Group, creating a learning opportunity about both the statute's subject matter and current calls for justice. A third option is to partner with educational organizations to provide events and learning opportunities around the controversial issues that the statute raises and the role of visual language in perpetuating harmful prejudices. Fourth would be to relocate the statute to a new site, such as a museum, if we were able to find one that was interested, where viewers can be provided with appropriate information about the statute's theme of emancipation, as well as the biases and prejudices that are embedded in artistic choices. Next would be to remove the statue entirely from public view and to formally remove it from the city's art collection. And lastly, to commission a new work of art, permanent or temporary, that replaces the existing statue. And then we leave room for people to offer their own recommendations. And we also have a long form answer that you can enter in. The conversations that come out of this public dialogue will help guide decisions around the art collection, and they may also help us better understand our histories and envision our future. Oh, sorry, next slide. So here you can see what the survey looks like. Next slide. Here you just have some information about the public dialogue we have thus far on the Emancipation Group. We have 2 special BAC meetings, today's meeting and the meeting next Tuesday at 5 p.m. on the 30th. Which will also be a Zoom meeting. We also have the online survey I just described with over 300 responses, and we have over 40 letters that have been written to the Art Commission, and we're anticipating receiving a lot more, and there may be more in our inboxes when this meeting's over. And we have also received a petition with over 12,000 signatures by the petition by artist Tori Bullock. Okay, next slide. So here we'll touch briefly on the monument report. This is the 2018 report we commissioned on Boston's commemorative landscape, specifically objects in the city's public art collection that are or could be deemed controversial. Next slide. So this is the cover of the report. It is by Eva Metzacek and was written in August of 2018. Next slide. The goals of the report were to provide a concise summary of the current debate and include an overview of how other cities have dealt with this issue. We do recommend that you read this to understand how other cities have been tackling similar issues, many of them with statues that have been dealt with, and we can update this report with some current information, and we'll be working to do so in these next weeks. Next slide. The first part of the report, again, goes around the national dialogue, and the second part touches on the conversation in Boston. Next slide, we list here the 6 monuments that are examined in this report as controversial or potentially controversial. And this, again, was done in 2018. Those 6 monuments are the Christopher Columbus Monument in Christopher Columbus Park in the North End, the Boston Common Tablet, the Blackstone Tablet on the Common, the Emancipation Group, in Park Plaza. Next slide. The Founders Memorial on the Common, and Samuel Eliot Morrison on the Comab Mall, and the Francis Parkman Memorial. The report makes the following suggestions for the Emancipation Group Memorial. The statue should be removed and relocated. Options for relocation are long-term loan with MFA or other institution, placed somewhere. It can be in conversation with other representations from the historical era and be interpreted by educators. Community dialogue should be encouraged about this statue through online or other platforms. This removal and potential relocation options would be an important step in demonstrating the city's commitment to listening to and valuing Black voices, as well as its commitment to racial equity. If the statue cannot be removed, at the very least, the city needs to add interpretive material to the text, to the site, and to develop materials around harmful visual representation, including the statue for educational purposes. Context could also be added by commissioning contemporary artists for temporary or permanent works at the site. This report was revisited at our last Art Commission meeting on June 9th, 2020. And the Art Commission determined at that meeting that they would discuss further at our next meeting. And this conversation has been brought forward. And so that is why we're having these special meetings, to be responsive to public input. Next slide. We've also been encouraged to share another work that's in our collection, The Spirit of Emancipation by Meta Warwick Fuller in Tubman Square Park in the South End. One respondent wrote to us and recommended that this work is the antithesis of Balls and offers a critique of emancipation from the point of view of an African-American woman, and she rejects the paternalistic stance embodied in Ball's emancipation, arguing that freedom must be seized by one's volition, by one's agency. Her freedwoman and freedwoman acknowledge the reactionary forces of racism and prejudice, but nevertheless, that one step forward with confidence in their own inner resources. This understanding is crucial for knitting together emancipation-related themes across the city, including wherever Ball's sculpture comes to rest. To assist in examining these examples, the Mayor's Office has started to create a searchable online database with educational content. By evaluating and understanding the artwork in the city's collection, we can understand what stories and people are missing and which artworks need to be reinterpreted or re-examined. We may also consider the biases and prejudices in our artistic choices, which I think you can see in the comparison of these pieces. So we are very much looking for educational opportunities as well, regardless of the decision made about this statue. We're also interested in the historical context that may have informed or limited the options available to the artists and the people advocating for the work. Okay, and next slide, I will pass back to Mark.
Yes, thanks, Karen. The Boston Art Commission suggests creating space to collect public testimony and input on the future of certain artworks. Starting today, we will be hearing public testimony, that's why we're all here, regarding the Emancipation Group. The second meeting of this topic will take place on June 25th at 5 p.m. This will give the public opportunity to respond to the memorial and suggest solutions. In a moment, we will move on to describe in detail how to use the Zoom platform to make your testimony. But first, I want to go over a few ground rules. Next slide, please. We do ask that you keep your testimony to 2 minutes so that we may hear from as many people as possible. The BAC, however, recommends much longer written testimony if you wish, and that can be sent to the email address shown on the screen, bac@boston.gov. You may also complete the survey that Karen mentioned, and the survey, again, to repeat, will be open until Monday at noon. And then more information on the process can be found on our website. And I'll turn it back to Karen to talk about the methods of requesting testimony. Next slide. Karen, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. So there are various ways that you can give verbal testimony today. You can request time to testify by using the Zoom platform, which you may be on right now. You can raise your hand, which will be showing you how to do that. But it is a little blue button. We don't actually mean by raising your hand in the window, though if we do catch you doing that, we will try to call on you, but we ask that you use the raise your hand function. And you can also let us know that you want to speak by entering a request into the chat box. If you have called in, if you are not on the Zoom platform, you can press *9 to let us know you wish to speak, and we will also identify you. If you do any of those things, staff will put you in a digital line, and when it's your turn, they will announce your name, and you should unmute yourself. We ask that you please keep yourself unmuted at other times so that we can hear each other, and that when it is your turn to talk and you've been called on, please state your name and share your testimony, and please keep your testimony to 2 minutes so we can have as much time for others as possible. Next slide. And here's just a visual for anyone who's new to Zoom. If you want to chat or to raise your hand, at the bottom of your screen, you should see a bar that has these images on it. The participants, the chats are the ones that you want to look out for. The chat, you can just click on and you should be able to write to one of my colleagues who will put you in line just to let them know that you want to speak. If you press on the participants button, you should see the bar below there and that little blue hand. You just press that one and a blue hand should show up next to your name and will let us know that you want to speak. We'll lower your hand and announce your name when it's your turn. And that time again, you should unmute yourself and state your name and share your comment and speak for 2 minutes. Okay, next slide.
Next slide. Thank you, Karen. Now we'll begin, Aqua Holmes and I will begin the process of calling on people. So it's the moment where you can actually raise your hand or chat your name in to be put in line.
You can see everybody. Yeah.
You could also mute yourself, please, if you're not speaking. We will be inviting you individually based on a list which you will see on the screen. So Aqua and I will invite you, ask you to state your name and then give your testimony. And again, we do ask that you try to keep it under 2 minutes.
So while the staff gets the speakers list organized, we wanted to make a short statement as chair and vice chair. We've been inspired by so many conversations, letters, responses to the surveys, videos, blog posts, social media, and editorials that have offered ideas about how to proceed with the Emancipation Group. These have come from our neighbors and fellow Bostonians, as well as people previously unknown to us and outside of our city. So this is something that everybody is thinking about. They've been characterized by insight, thoughtfulness, and passion. In addition, we want to acknowledge the 12,000 plus petitioners organized by Tory Bullock and the 300 plus survey respondents who have provided input within the first 48 hours of this survey alone. They remind us of the scale of impact our process can have. And then I want to also recognize the tireless contributions of the Boston Art Commission staff who have been dedicated to helping the commission take on this issue of social justice in our collection on short notice, actually, and guiding us, though, since 2018 with the report that Karen spoke of, which set the way for future actions. All of the members of the commission realize the gravity of the issues we are examining today, and we look forward to being guided by your testimonies in this session and again on Tuesday. We're here to listen to your thoughts and your ideas, your creativity and your imagination. So with that, I will ask Christina to open up the list of speakers, and I'll begin by calling on the first one. Don't forget to state your name, please, and do your best to keep your testimony to the time limit. Thank you so much on behalf of all of us. So it looks like Edmund Barry Gaither is the first person listed on the testimony queue. Am I right about that?
That's what I'm looking at. So am I on?
Yes, you're on.
All right, I'm Edmund Barry Gaither, and I have taken the survey and submitted that and will submit longer written testimony. So I want to just excerpt the heart of what I'm going to submit. Regarding Emancipation Group by Thomas Ball, a replica of which is in Park Square. This work has been controversial since its unveiling in 1876. Though initially initiated and substantially funded by newly freed Black men, many of whom served in the Civil War, the project was taken over and executed by the Missouri-based White Western Sanitary Commission, which ultimately determined its perspective and content as a public memorial. Thus, the production and content of Emancipation Group are profoundly tainted by paternalism, which is a benevolent form of white supremacy in the 19th century. Paternalists, many of them abolitionists, viewed Black people as children to be warded over by white people who knew what was best for them. They needed white fathers to look after them. With Black people perceived as incapable of self-governance and juvenile in their intellectual and moral development, white people appointed themselves their stewards and eagerly made decisions for them without even minimal consultation. Indeed, just as slave owners represented that they knew the best interests of slaves, so often Northern liberals presumed to know what was best for free Black communities and how they should fight for their rights. The white mask of benevolence denied Black people agency, voice, and self-ownership, and required of them cowering and subservience. These attitudes are everywhere apparent in Emancipation Group, where President Abraham Lincoln is cast as the great and generous father who bestows freedom on his grateful children. This is the real meaning of the great emancipator who is shown standing tall in an act of benediction, giving freedom to former slaves. He is flanked by the Emancipation Proclamation, a whipping post and chains. At his feet, the grateful freedman grovels amid broken shackles. Nothing in the presentation acknowledges that nearly 200,000 Black soldiers fought to preserve the Union as well as to win their freedom through valor and blood. The docile recipient of Lincoln's benevolence shows no sign of the vigor, cunning, and resolve that Black soldiers brought to their service after Lincoln was reluctantly persuaded to let them fight. Frederick Douglass, an honored guest at the Washington D.C. unveiling in 1876, was insulted by Ball's characterization and decried the crouching freedman at Lincoln's knees. His sentiment was wide in the Black community across the nation in the 19th century, though it was not commonly published. Put succinctly, Emancipation Group misattributes the ending of slavery to Lincoln's action only and diminishes the role played by Blacks in securing their own liberation. It supports a paternalistic view of emancipation and by extension fosters a softer face of white supremacy. Of all that I've said, it must be acknowledged that Emancipation Group exists and is part of our history and must be contended with. In my view, a first choice would be to retire it from Park Square and from public display. Alternatively, it might find a home in a new interior setting where it could be fully contextualized and interpreted. Such an option would use its presence to anchor discussion of 19th century attitudes and narratives about race and our national saga. If well done, discourse about Emancipation Group would send learners to visit other public works that bear on the theme of Blacks and freedom, such as Spirit of Emancipation in Harriet Tubman Park, Christmas Attucks and Boston Massacre Monument, the Monument to the 54th, Step on Board, the Monument to Harriet Tubman in the Harriet Tubman Park, and Flight, featuring Captain David L. Ramsey in Ramsey Park. And upcoming works would also be in that consideration, such as the Frederick Douglass Memorial and the Coretta Scott King and Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial, and the Edward O'Gordine Veterans Monument. A broader scope and richer embrace of art in public spaces would open the opportunity to examine many perspectives on Black contributions to national and global concepts of liberty, freedom, and civic responsibility, using our city as a primary resource. And as an even more expansive spiritual, conceptual, and historical landscape that would open to us if we looked at Black humanity more generally and looked at works beyond the downtown, such as, for example, Eternal Presence at the National Center for Afro-American Artists, Phyllis Wheatley Memorial on Commonwealth Avenue, the Judge at Roxbury Court on Warren Street, or A. Philip Randolph statue in Back Bay Station, or I Believe I Can Fly near Elliott Square in Roxbury. In this list, I have not.
Barry, can I just ask you to wrap up so that we can get on to the next person on this very long line?
One sentence and I'm finished.
Thank you, sweetheart.
Okay. I've not included in this other media than sculpture, but of course there are also important murals that also could belong to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, the next person in line is Jahan Bodden. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Jahan, are you available?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you. It's hard to come behind that first speaker, but I thank you for giving us the platform to be able to speak. I'll state simply, my mother was born here and grew up here. I was born here and grew up here. My daughter was born here and grew up here. We have never seen this statue. I worked downtown, never noticed it, didn't know anything about it. And this conversation and finding out, it was on the cover of my Sunday Globe, reading about this has been amazing. It has been an amazing experience for me. I'm constantly learning about the heroes, everything that's gone on over the last 400 years. It is amazing still how much history I still have to learn. I ask that maybe relocation might be a good idea, but all of this, from what the eloquent first speaker stated, needs to be taught. None of this is regularly taught. None of it. My daughter had an extensive Black history learning growing up, and she knows nothing about this. And in reading it, I was taken aback as to why we don't know. I was reading about a woman who works in the Milton public school system. She decided to teach her sixth graders. She gave them 2 poems by Langston Hughes and 1 by Nikki Giovanni. And she was put on leave and investigated because it was not approved in the curriculum that she was teaching. And racism and everything is just not discussed outside of urban education. This needs to be taught. Everything needs to be taught. And I know it's an eyesore for many people, but I would rather have it in people's faces than put away somewhere. Because we all know about the statues that are being taken down now, from Francis Scott Key, trying to take down Andrew Jackson, Jefferson Davis. It's all in the history books. But something like this isn't. And it's just as important, even more. I just simply am asking that this not be put away. I think disclaimers are needed. More education needs to be taught. It needs to be part of, even if it's just Massachusetts education system, but it needs to be a part of what we are supposed to learn. And that's really, there's so much more, of course, but I'm just so frustrated at what I've asked many of my white colleagues, how much Black history did they have growing up? And many of them have said maybe they learned about the Civil War. To me, that's not what I meant, but that's what's being taught. And many of them are from around the country. So I'm just simply saying it needs to remain public. Thank you for hearing me.
Thank you so much, Jahan. Next up, I have someone who's simply stated as A12020.
Hi, my name is Paloma, and I live in Boston, and I go to Tufts. But I am originally from Southside Chicago, and then I moved to a city called Rockford. Not a suburb, but I went from living to an all Latino community to an entirely Black community. And my high school was majority Black. And fortunately, we actually had teachers who taught us like real history. And I think it's important to actually share one of the ones I share a lot of art history on my Instagram now, because I feel like it's one of the most accessible ways to actually share art history. A lot of BIPOC don't actually go to museums, especially children don't have accessibility to museums, or they feel alienated when they actually go to museums. So this is a letter that was written to Horace Greeley by President Lincoln. I would save the Union. I would save it the shortest way under the Constitution. The sooner the national authority can be restored, the nearer the Union will be the Union as it was. If there will be those who would not save the Union unless they could at the same time save slavery, I do not agree with them. If there be those who would not save the Union unless they could at the same time destroy slavery, I do not agree with them. My paramount object in the struggle is to save the Union, and it is neither to save or to destroy slavery. If I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing all the slaves, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing some and leaving others alone, I would do it. I would also do that. What I do about slavery and the colored race, I do because I believe it helps to save the Union. And what I forbear because I do not believe it would help to save the Union. I shall do less whenever I shall believe what I'm doing hurts the cause, and I shall do more whenever I shall believe doing more will help the cause. I shall try to correct errors when shown to be errors, and I shall adopt new views so fast as they shall appear to be true views. This is one of the most famous letters that Lincoln ever wrote, and it actually shows that he was not against slavery. He was more caring to keep the status quo and to keep the Union as it was and to reestablish order within the country. So a lot of people don't know about this history, and they see Lincoln as a savior who had one sight in mind. So I actually propose that we have a public art that actually replaces this with this knowledge shared to people. Because if you just relocate the statue into a museum where people can actually share the actual history of what happened, it's actually not going to reach a lot of low-income, poor, Black people, Latinos, Indigenous people, and communities that are not shown to be a part of museums. So that's all I have to say. And I think this letter really shows and mutes down how Lincoln actually viewed slavery in a very contemporary sense to even now, because a lot of people who are part of Black Lives Matter and people who are white allies or not white allies want to reestablish this nation as it was before as quickly as possible. So that's all I have to say.
Paloma, thank you. I want to ask you, how did you hear about this meeting?
My boss, my boss is Randy. She's on this. I'm an intern at the BCA.
Okay, wonderful. I appreciate your comments about Instagram as well. We all have to look at new ways to be in communication with all kinds of folks. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Mark, I'm going to pass it back to you.
For the next one, yeah, the first three have been so eloquent. And next up, we have Greg Gaylor from Boston Preservation Alliance.
Good evening. Thank you. Yes, I'm Greg Gaylor. I'm the Executive Director of the Boston Preservation Alliance. Earlier today, our organization issued a statement on monuments and memorials that in part notes the Boston Preservation Alliance acknowledges that the anguish symbols of racism have caused to the Black community for generations must end. We must recognize that these symbols have inflicted daily pain on many. And for too many of us, we've dismissed this as simple, these monuments as simple reflections of a past or works of art for which their negative aspects could be ignored. But we can't continue the same blind stance that ignores the impact they have on our fellow Bostonians. So we come today to the much needed discussion on this particular sculpture. We, the Boston Preservation Alliance, shouldn't be the arbiter, the people of Boston should be. But from our perspective, even when intentions of the past may not have been as nefarious as they were for many Confederate monuments across the country, it's imperative that we consider the messages sent to our community through our public symbols. We must weigh the benefits with the harm to us today, to everyone. We must balance their location and their provenance against the historical context and lessons of the past they can provide, which have been mentioned by others tonight. We must consider who and what they honor, and their artistic merit against the painful, hurtful, cultural, moral, and psychological harm they cause. Now, we don't believe this monument should be destroyed or never see the light of day, for its contemporary history has much to teach us. But we do feel the time has come in our society, our civil society, to stop reinforcing painful old tropes. In today's society, we must do better. We can recognize Lincoln and emancipation without demoralizing our fellow Bostonians. Relocating the statue to some place where we can truly contextualize it and explore its history and how it came to be, where we can consider why this once felt appropriate and reflect on the progress we've hopefully made. And hopefully we can come to a time and look at it and shake our heads and think that it's strange that there was a time when this was okay. That we think should be our goal. So thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight.
Okay, thank you, Greg. Our next speaker is Palma.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I actually want to thank Jahan, the second speaker, because I really heard her. I am a lifelong resident of Boston, as are my parents and my grandparents and my children. And when I heard about this, I will be submitting longer testimony. But when I heard about this, I actually went back to have to contextualize it. So I actually read the Emancipation Proclamation. I read the oration by Frederick Douglass delivered on the occasion of the unveiling of the Freedmen's Monument in 1876. I read biographical information on Archer Alexander, including an NPR piece, a piece in Ebony magazine, and his 1885 biography. I also checked out the bios of the sculptor Thomas Ball, Moses Kimball, William Greenleaf Eliot, who was a befriended Archer Anderson, Archer Alexander, Union Brigadier General Thomas C.H. Smith, and Charlotte Scott, who got the ball rolling many, many years ago when she heard of Lincoln's death. I also looked up the background information on 3 other pieces of art. The Freedmen's Memorial is in 1876, Robert Gould Shaw Memorial in 1884, and Fearless Girl in 2017 on Wall Street. I looked at some of the statements of historian John Meacham, George Orwell's dystopian novel, 1984, and my daughter, who is currently a Boston Public Schools high school student and an aspiring artist who works for Artists Humanity and wants to go on to art school. I believe that this should stay and it should be contextualized, because what I found through both primary sources and other readings, I found very interesting. I actually even found 2 errors on the City of Boston description of it. According to, I'm old enough to remember when Glory came out, the movie, and everybody was surprised they had never heard of that story. And I said, what do you mean you've never heard of it? Because I had been passing that memorial for years and looked it up. It taught me about that long before the movie came out. In this case, I actually took a look at some of the things about this. According to some of the sources from the 19th century, it is not a crouching slave. It is actually a rising man. And in his hand, he is actually breaking his own shackles. There was one reference I found that it talked about since the beginning of the Civil War, the slaves contributed to their own freeing. And that was especially the case with Archer Alexander, who had a history of helping the Union Army as a free slave. The other thing we have to actually look at is there are concepts that we no longer see, because in the 19th century, the religiosity of the entire thing would have been obvious. The Emancipation talks about by the right of Almighty God. Lincoln is raising his hand in benediction. But if you actually look at it, even today, if you go to a church service on a Sunday, when the priest leaves, he actually does a benediction and a dismissal, which is take the experience you've had and go forth into the world. With those conceptualizations, it becomes a very different than crouching and subservient. It is rising and empowered with a story to tell us all. And the reason I actually meant there are ties from the Emancipation Proclamation to the Robert Gould Memorial. it is actually mentioned the enlistment of Negro soldiers and working for one's wages, a fair wage, in the Emancipation Proclamation. Finally, the last part about this is I mentioned the Fearless Girl, which was a temporary installation in 2017 on Wall Street, and it was put in almost immediately after the largest one-day march in world history, which was the Women's March on January 21st, 2017. This was established in March 2017. They put the Fearless Girl.
You to finish up.
Oh.
Could you please finish up?
Oh, what happened is when they had the Fearless Girl facing the raging Wall Street bull, it recontextualized everything and brought it into the present and created dialogue. I personally believe with the resources we have in Boston, the Boston Public Library, primary resources through Mass Historical Society, that it is an opportunity to add to the story from what I found in the primary sources that I was reading.
Okay, thank you very much. Seems like you've been doing a lot of reading. That's great. Next speaker is Carl Turner. Carl, could you unmute yourself?
Is it Carrie? Carrie Turner?
Oh, it could be Carrie Turner. Perhaps.
Okay. I'm not sure if you can see me, but
yes, you can.
I'm my name's Carrie Turner. I'm Black. I'm a resident of the One Charles building, the grounds where the statue sits in Boston. And this statue, when I first saw it, I hated it. My husband lived here. When I asked him about it, he said he hated it too. And the reason why we hate it is it's an image, it's art, and the art that it's representing is not someone who's free and equal. This image perpetuates a narrative that white people are superior to Black people. It's a false feeling that was developed out of fear and insecurity of the oppressing race. I walk by this statue every day, and I have to avert my eyes every time I see it. For me, it represents the traumatic experience that Black people went through of chattel slavery in this country. I do not feel like I'm grateful for being freed on that day. I feel like we tried to be free as soon as we got here. Many people killed themselves so they didn't have to be enslaved here. And when I walked by that statue with my son, and he asked me, why is that man that looks like my father on his knees? And I have to tell him, the answer will never make sense. Someone who is abused, terrorized, doesn't want to see the image of themselves when they were being abused and terrorized. When Deval Patrick became governor, I thought to myself, and I understand there's not a lot of Black people at the table in a lot of these rooms in Boston. I live in Back Bay. I'm one of the only Black people in the room everywhere I go. My kids go to school here. And I understood, I said, when Deval Patrick, I said, well, maybe he might see this statue and be just as disgusted and get rid of it. Finally, there's a Black man at the top that's gonna do something. It didn't happen. And I have to say, I really wanna thank Tori Bullock and everyone else who's spoken out against this, because it's hard, it's tiring, as racism everywhere in Boston, and Black people, we have to pick and choose our battles. And I just never decided that was the battle I was gonna pick. And he took the lead on it. And I just want to say, for people, white people who walk by this, my mom is white, I understand both sides of how people see this, who walk by this and didn't see this as a problem. I would ask you to think, how many Black people or people of color, minority people do I have in my inner circle? Because if I had people in my inner circle, you would be hearing this perspective. You would see this and see a problem with it right away. But not enough people have a Black person who they can just be casual with, who they can hear from in their family to tell them this perspective. And so as you try to educate yourself, also try to keep, befriending and seeing your blind spots. Get more in touch with other people that live in this country. Don't, you know, maybe you didn't have that growing up, but now is a great awakening in the nation and the world, and this would be a good time to start.
Thank you.
And I just ask you to think about, you know, what would I tell my son? This is a misrepresentation for my son of who his father, how he should think of himself, and it's really traumatic for me.
Thank you, Carrie. That's a very obviously heartfelt and testimony. Thank you for taking.
You're welcome. Thank you for hearing me.
So much.
Nicola?
Yes, so next on our list is Chad Fletcher. Chad, are you here? Chad, are you with us?
Yeah. Oh, I was on mute, so I had to unmute myself.
Okay, great. Great to see you, Chad. We'd love to hear from you.
Okay, so yeah, of course, yeah, I am a Boston resident. We have met before. It was actually at the meeting. It was actually a meeting for the Edward Gordine statue, which you actually did approve. So thank you for that once again. And yeah, I did send the mayor an email about taking this statue down. I've done a number of the steps that that Kristen brought up. I took all of them, and I will be forwarding the email I wrote to Mayor Menino later on today to that same email address. But here's the crux of what I'm saying. You know, a lot of times, many places I go throughout the city, you know, and when I went on the tour of the Freedom Trail, you know, when I learned that Massachusetts was the first state to end slavery. So, the first state to end it outright. I mean, Pennsylvania was the first state to end it. So everybody that was born after they passed their law in 1780, the child of every slave that was born after 1780 was meant to be born free. But Massachusetts, by judicial decree, had abolished slavery outright. So it wouldn't matter if it was if you were already living, or, you know, if your children were born into slavery. Everybody was everyone was was free of that here in Massachusetts, one of the first 13 colonies. But the other thing that you don't hear much about is that Massachusetts was also the first state to legalize slavery. This was in 1641. Okay, so it's not. So I definitely think that we should not try to hide that here in Massachusetts, and not to hide the history of racism that does exist here, and still does in many ways. You know, I read under Section 91 how the slaves in Massachusetts were actually how it was legal. And although Lincoln himself didn't own slaves, the people who were in his closest circle, or inner circle, did own slaves. And after he was assassinated, his successor was also a slave owner. That's none other than Ulysses Grant. As I was constructing my email to the mayor, you know, I won't get too deep into it, you know, in this testimony, but I came across a woman that put out a very racist rant, and accusing. I mean, what she was accusing was Black folks, you know, like us, being ungrateful to the Republic. I mean, I don't want to get political, but it was just a lot of hate and a lot of vitriol that came out of that. This is this is just one of those once in a lifetime opportunities to be on the right side of history. I mean, I compared this Lincoln statue with the statue of Edward Colston in England that was taken down in Bristol. And I do hope that this statue is taken down. Because this is, like I said, you know, anybody who wants to be on the right side of history, now's the time to actually cement, you know, to make that, you know, to actually prove it. Not just want to do it, but to actually have a chance at being on the right side of history. You know, you have to make sure you can do that. Or I'm sorry, you just have to follow the right actions. I'm sorry if I'm getting tongue-tied here, if I'm not, like, I still want to be as coherent as possible. You know, this isn't a prepared statement. I don't know, but yes, this is and see, the thing is, I was going too far off on a tangent there, but this is like, I definitely think this is this being taken down has just as much historical value in the city of Boston as the statue of Columbus being removed. The statue where Columbus once stood, and the statue, and where the Lincoln statue is currently located, both of those statues, need to be replaced by somebody who, or by people who have actually unified us, and not just unified, but have also done a world of good. One of the ideas I have to replace Columbus is Mayor Menino, none other than that, in that same spot where he was, where Christopher Columbus was. I haven't put that much thought into who I think. I mean, I'm not the only person here. But I haven't put that much thought into who could be in place of, the Lincoln Memorial. But I would recommend, or I would like to see that, you know, its replacement be developed by a Black artist. I'm sure we have a lot of them here. I don't know that many of them, other than
I'm going to ask you to please wrap up so we can move on to the next person on the list. And if you have other suggestions that you want to make, you can do them through the website that was mentioned earlier, because I think you have some interesting ideas. Okay.
Okay. Yes, that was all. I just wanted to make sure I got that out.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Next on our list is Darrell Ann Gain McCullough.
Hi, good evening, everybody.
Hi, Darrell Ann.
My name is Darrell Ann Gain McCullough. I'm a sculptor and I'm an art teacher. And I'm originally from Cambridge, and I lived in Boston for about 10 years. And I recently moved to Philadelphia a couple years ago. And during some of the time I was in Boston, I was the original artist for the Frederick Douglass sculpture that's still in progress. And this sculpture has got to go. It's degrading, it's ahistorical. Its roots are not the same as the Confederate monuments, but the imagery is not appropriate for 2020 or even 1950 or 1879 or whatever. So to have it removed to a park with other problematic sculptures, and to commission Black artists to do both temporary and temporary and permanent public art at the site. There's hundreds of Black artists in Boston. There's little opportunity. And we could see really creative solutions through commission artwork that responds to this, that responds to the temporary moment. So it's gotta go, and some new art has gotta come.
Okay. Thank you. Next is Isaiah Plavnik. Isaiah, are you with us?
Listening. Is this all right?
Thank you. Yes.
Hi. I don't want to repeat anything anyone's already said, nor speak from an experience that isn't my own, but I was born and raised just outside Boston. I work in Boston. For a brief stint, I used to work in the theater district, and I'm not partial to crowds or peace, so instead of eating in the garden like everyone else did on their lunch breaks, I found Park Square. It's a nice shady tree. I used to sit there, and the first time I saw the statue, it made me cringe. Apart from the fact that I do not think we should be celebrating white saviors as if they were giving the sign of Benedict. He wasn't a priest. He was a politician. He wasn't even a revolutionary, as has been said. Not saying he was a bad president, but this is what we see of him, and there are already at least 33 statues of him nationwide. And the first time I saw it, it's like, that looks like Abraham Lincoln has a slave. It's a bad, bad design. The man is not, it's in the description on every page online and in records, it's referred to as the man, the freed man, is shown rising. He's not, he's on his knees, which in film, maybe, fine, acceptable, but in a static, in a bronze casted statue, he's always going to be on his knees. He's always going to be manacled. You can't see him breaking the shackles. You see him kneeling in front of a white man with his hand out like this. What? So on site, didn't like it. But I liked the solitude, so I kept having lunch there. And one day, a man of a certain age and his son, who I could only estimate to be in his late 20s, are walking past. Both are white. This is in the dead of summer. They're on the other side of the street. I think they're coming out of Legal Seafoods. I can't remember. But I distinctly remember the father points at this statue, and I hear him say, and I apologize, this is content warning, this isn't profane, but it is very crude. The man said, "Yeah, good boy," referring to Lincoln in the act of, as I can only assume, holding his hand over like a dog. I hated it. I hated it. I couldn't finish my lunch. Were I of a greater constitution or a more courageous bent, I would have confronted this man over his crass remark. But instead, I just went back to work. Tory Bullock, I used to know him a lot better than I do now, but he's always been an inspiration to me, and his words carry much more strength than mine. But from a completely logical point of view, the design is bad. It gives the absolute wrong message, and it's not even ours. It's not even original. There's one exactly like it. The original's in D.C. Even if we take this one down, there's still going to be one in D.C. Who would complain? This one could go, if I had my druthers, this would be in the Somerville Museum of Bad Art. It really would. But, which is a thing, wonderful place to go. But instead of this, I can think of so many, something in comparison in the garden, or possibly the Common, I can't remember, there's the Boston Massacre Monument. Sometimes referred to, and I don't know why it's referred to this or how it's referred to this, as the Crispus Attucks Monument. Now, I didn't know who Crispus Attucks was until 2017, which is a shame because I'm born and raised in Boston. This man is a Bostonian hero, an American hero, possibly the American hero, the first man to die fighting the American Revolution on the steps of the State House. He was a man of African American and Native American descent. He was a free man fighting for, and no one knows who he was. And this, well, that's obviously some people know who he was. I didn't know who he was, didn't learn about him in school. I learned about him through a Netflix show. And I was so upset about that until I looked to see if there were any statues of him. And then there's this one, just this one. And it's I don't know why it's called the Crispus Attucks Monument, because he's not on there. It's a statue of the, and I quote the Wikipedia page, the spirit of revolution, standing, it's a Roman goddess type figure. And he's allegedly depicted on a bronze plaque on the bottom of it. And even so, if it is him depicted there, he's depicted as a corpse lying in front of the State House. Now, I'd much rather eat, my lunch in that quiet square, and it's a nice neighborhood. but something that didn't make me want to lose said lunch, and something that actually bore significant, significance to Boston and the message that this Emancipation statue is allegedly trying to convey. And I think that's crispus attucks. Thank you.
Isaiah, thank you so much for your testimony. I appreciate it. Mark?
Yes, so next up, next speaker is Nina Lanegra. Are you on the line? Nina?
Sorry, took me a second to figure out the mute. Yes, I'm here, thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to engage with everyone. People have touched a lot of very important points, and I'm glad to be able to lend my voice to this conversation. I wanted to say that in an age that is only 1 year after 400 years of enslavement of Africans from 1619 to 2019, this statue is a complete and utter disgrace. I think that it's a time now in the age of George Floyd and many others to begin to imagine a holistic world done away with global white male supremacy, and that these images and messages need to be deconstructed and taught in schools, museums, and libraries, but also in public spaces. And growing up in Massachusetts, 4 years of high school, the only thing I heard about African American history was Black people were slaves. The thing, my parents were educators. I think that perhaps, and I think it was kind of mentioned, maybe we should have a park of problematic sculptures and problematic art, and there should be extensive touring and teaching publicly. But I want to make 3 points, and one is that this racist iconography, as Barry Gaither was calling for, needs to be contextualized. Not only do we need to remove it in Boston, but we should also advocate it for it to be the small model to be removed from Methuen as well, and in Washington, D.C. Second, I think that youth need to participate in the education or re-education of the history of the statue. I used to be a public school teacher, a college professor, and I am an artist now. When I taught in Cambridge, my class at the Agassiz was responsible through media literacy and deconstruction of images and messages in changing the name of their school right next to Harvard, named after a Harvard botanist who was a scientific racist, from Louis Agassiz to Mariah Baldwin, who was the first teacher of the Agassiz school, a Black woman who never had a Black child that she taught in her entire 31 years. She died of a heart attack teaching and being a principal. So there are many worthy people who can be exemplified. If you want to make it contemporary, I can think of living ones and ones who have passed that would do well to have a statue there. When I first saw this statue was back in the 1990s, and I was a talk show host at the time, and I advocated strongly and vociferously to bring attention to the statue and to have it removed. Unfortunately, there wasn't enough social media at the time to get that moving. I appreciate Brother Torrey Shiloh and the folks who have supported him for bringing this to the attention of the city of Boston and many others. And lastly, I'd like to say that at the Museum of Fine Arts, in contemporary times, has been bombarded with employees who are racist and putting forth racist messages. But the museum itself there's a great need to decolonize the images in the museums, and there's a movement to do so. We should think about that, decolonizing not just the images in the museum, but also in our public art arena. So those are the points I want to make. I'm going to follow up with a letter, something a little more concise, as well as fill out the survey, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for saying that, Nina. Rebecca Morin is next.
Hello, my name is Rebecca Morin. I am a librarian and instructor at the Tufts University School of Medicine, a very short walk from where this statue stands. I've been thinking about this statue quite a bit because I discussed it in a talk that I gave on Juneteenth as part of a day reflection, commitment, and action for racial justice hosted by the university. And what comes across very clearly if you are a student of history, a student of art history, if you are an archivist, a librarian, or anybody familiar with the history of publishing in the middle of the 19th century in the United States, is that emancipation is continually focused on whiteness. It is continually centered on white people. It is continually centered on Abraham Lincoln. Just about all published images from the time of emancipation and forward center Lincoln or other white people, or even, somebody mentioned the Greek goddesses. There's a spirit of liberty. There is Lincoln. There are generals going to communities on Juneteenth and after to free people. This narrative is pervasive. It's false. It's everywhere. And Carrie, if you're still in the meeting, you gave a really powerful testimony about how, in addition to being everywhere, this imagery is extremely harmful and painful. And while Ball has a very important history as a Boston sculptor, he's from Charlestown. I'm standing in my house in Charlestown. He's responsible for many other significant monuments in Boston. There is no reason to continually subject passersby to a narrative that is not hard to find with any access to historical materials. It is there for everyone to see, and I don't think there's any reason for Boston to continue to perpetuate this false and painful narrative. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca. Our next speaker is Faith Johnson. Faith, unmute yourself if you're still here.
I'm still here.
Great.
Hi, my name is Faith Johnson, and I'm an artist. Hello, Ikwa. I think a lot about the power of symbol on our psyches. And I just, we've obviously, we've been living in I also think a lot about myth and how our stories kind of create the reality that we come to know. So, we've been living in this false myth of white supremacy, and when the myth is dismantled, the symbols that uphold that myth really need to be dismantled as well, and to make room for a new story without hiding the ugliness of the past. And that's really all I have to say.
Thank you very much. Ikwa, you will take over from here. You're on mute.
Yes. Sorry. Now I'd like to invite Selena to speak. Selena, are you still with us?
Yes, I'm here. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for allowing me this opportunity. I hope you can hear me well. I just want to first shout out to Ms. Turner, who came to the mic, so to speak, and put her heart on the table. I've been a Boston resident for just about 60 years, and this statue is absolutely a disgrace. I can't tell you, those who are not African American, how it feels to walk past a statue of this type, where you have a young Black boy sitting at the feet of its master. How disturbing. I can't tell you what it feels like to explain to my young son what that means. I can't explain to you how that makes him feel as a little Black boy wanting to grow up as a Black man in Massachusetts, in this country. There's an outrage, an internal outrage for most African Americans in particular, since this, George Floyd situation that we've lived with for decades, And for me personally, for someone to say, I think the statue should stay, but let's give it a tagline. Let's give it, another story, but the statue is to remain. To me, it's an insult. It's a slap in the face. To me, it says, it's okay, I hear your voice, but we're just gonna keep it because we like it and you're just gonna have to get over with it. That's how I take that, and I am so offended. I am so offended. This, I grew up in the 60s and I never thought I would ever have to be in this place again in my life. Not me just going through this, but my sons. My youngest son graduated with an undergraduate degree, a double major, astronomy and physics with a minor in math from a flagship school here in Massachusetts. He was the only person like him in all of his classes. On the first day of class, his white professor walked up to him, tapped him on the shoulder, and says, "You might as well give up now. You're not going to make it." This was just 4 years ago. This is where we are. You don't know, as a non-African American, a person of color, what the hell we go through. Every time my son faced this crap at school, at a flagship university, I had to go and drive 2 hours and talk him down. I have to talk him down to get him in a better frame of mind from some of the racist bullshit, excuse my language, that he deals with in 2000 whatever. It's just bananas. Yes, the statue most certainly should be removed, period, off the face of the planet as far as I'm concerned. To do anything less is to tell me how you, white America, feels about me. And at this point in time, I don't think you give a damn, because we shouldn't be here having to prove why this statue needs to be removed. It should be a no-brainer. It really should.
Selena,
Thank you.
I want to thank you so much for your heartfelt testimony. I'm sure a lot of people who are listening could relate very much to what you're going through with your son. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next on our list is another group of letters and numbers, Z plus G2B.
This is Bill Singleton.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, glad that you're here. We'd love to hear from you.
Bill, I don't know how to use the Zoom. I apologize. This is kind of new to me. But this is Bill Singleton. Years ago, I came here to Boston and I published a magazine called Black History is No Mystery, June 6, 1990. We've interviewed several people from history, but today I wanted to weigh in on the history of the statue in terms of how it is played here. I believe the statue should be removed. We can make better history and greater history that resembles the nation we want to be, as opposed to the history that has so many times left us, in need. Statues represent, in most cases, the best aspirations of people, past, present, and future. And this statue represents a time when Blacks had no voice. They had no power. They had no consideration. And so they could get away with making this statue because this statue, in a sense, was reflecting how they felt about Black people. They didn't really respect the people that they were claiming to free. They just felt that they could do this. So if we want to be a better Boston, a new Boston, creating better history and better images, it's imperative that we remove something that hurts so many Americans, including the Americans that died for this country, starting with Crispus Attucks, Peter Salem and Salem Poor at Bunker Hill. You see, they can disrespect because they don't know the history. People don't know the history. Black, white, Latino, Asian, they don't know the history that at 1860, 6/7 of the wealth of this country came from slaves, cotton, and sugar. We have built America. Now give us the respect with the statues that you can create that give us better understanding. This does not educate us. This harms many Americans who suffered for many years and never got their rights, some dying for this country without seeing that promise true. So I am asking all of you there to come together and overcome these attitudes that can allow for someone to kill someone on tape because they're unaware of the value of another human being that does not look like them. That they can hunt someone because they fear them. They can hunt them, literally just run up to them and shoot them because they fear them. Each one of these statues that we take down that deride human beings lessens the chance that someone will think it necessary to go and hunt and kill someone. So it is important for us to not only know history, but to learn to create better history. And that's why I advocate taking this statue down. I don't want to be too long. So those are my thoughts there. And I really like what many of you have said there about the history, about the ability to grow better. And I think that when we can create a monument that really speaks of who we want to be, that is better than to look at something that insults so many Americans, Black and white, Latino and Asian. So, you know, this is what I would want to weigh in on. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Go ahead, Mark. I was muted.
Well, I'm noticing that we're at the end of our list. If there's any other people who want to give testimony, they should raise their hand now. We still have another 15 minutes if we need it. And I just want to say how struck I am by the incredibly powerful comments that have been made throughout the evening so far, and how many of them have referenced the importance of learning something from this opportunity to evaluate this sculpture. And I think we've, as a commission, learned quite a lot tonight. So I want to thank everybody who's already spoken. If there still are a few more people who'd like to speak, we can leave room for that. But we also have another meeting coming up on Tuesday next week, if people prefer. And then, of course, for some of you who may not want to speak in this format, if you don't feel comfortable or you don't feel it's the right format, we encourage you to fill out our survey. Actually, in fact, we encourage everybody to fill out our survey, but others of you may wish to write your comments on and email them to the commission. These are all options for helping us understand the context of the human context of this sculpture and the impact it's having on our own community.
I want to add this. I think this is true that all of the surveys and the testimony that's been sent in will be public information and will be available somewhere if you'd like to peruse other ideas and other perspectives on this. And maybe Karen can tell us how that's happening.
Yes, I think it's going to be, oh, it is our next slide. There we go.
Hi. Yeah, thank you, Ika and Mark, and thank you everybody for your testimony today and for joining us. As Mark and Ika just shared with you, our next meeting, as you know, will be Tuesday, June 30th. If you just listened in today and would like to make testimony, please do join us. Got a preview today. You can also email your written testimony to the address bac@boston.gov. All of that will be presented to the commission. They will have the opportunity to read your testimony before Tuesday's meeting. And we will also share the online survey results at Tuesday's meeting. We can make those publicly available, but we'll also be sharing them at our meeting on Tuesday. So that is why we are asking people to take it before Monday at noon. We want to close it so that we have time to make it presentable and share it with everyone. I think we already have over 300 respondents to that right now. So please do take it and share. And you can find that on our website, boston.gov, /art under review.
Okay, thank you, Karen. We'll see no other comments. I would, again, like to sincerely thank everybody. I feel like we as a commission have benefited by listening to you, and we will keep the listening going. And we have a lot of reading to do as well over the weekend, diving into both history and the letters that people are writing to us. We've already read, I think, 40 of them, or I've read 40 of them, and they've equal you know, in another format, they equal the kind of depth of thoughtfulness and intelligence that we heard tonight, and the passion behind the questions that we're facing with this particular sculpture. So thank you to everybody for doing that. Our next order of business will be to have a motion to adjourn. So would somebody from the commission like to make such a motion?
I'd just like to say one more thing before we get to that, and that is I want to personally thank all of the folks that showed up here this evening. This is something that the Boston Art Commission is really looking for, which is community input. And even at our regular meetings, which are now all virtual, you are welcome to come and learn about the process of establishing public art, taking care of the art that the city of Boston owns, and get involved in the process. And I also really would like to underscore what Bill Singleton said about a new Boston and creating a better history together, so that when people are walking by our public art with their children, they don't have to put their heads down. So I love that as an ending thought. Bill, thank you for that. And now, if someone wants to make
actually, at risk of not ending on that very great note, I wonder if other commissioners might want to say a word or two. If there's any commissioners who would at this point, we can open it up. Hearing none, we will then seek a motion to adjourn.
I move that we adjourn.
Who was that, Lisa?
Lisa. Yes, Lisa.
Okay, Lisa's moved to adjourn. Do I have a second?
I'll second that. This is Aqua.
Okay, all those in favor, if you just say your name and yay.
Aqua Holmes.
Camilo Alvarez, yay.
Byfield, yay.
Lisa Tung, yay.
Michael Canizzo, yes.
And Mark Pasnick, yes. So the motion passes. We are adjourned, and thank you to everybody who participated tonight.